Well, the first hour is down. Now time for the second hour in our conversation. We are looking at the future of SMEs in this country, and we're also focusing on the current status of this critical industry. If I can give you some very interesting data, the sector contributes almost 50% of Kenya's GDP, and when it comes to employment, we are looking at over 80%. And something else is 8 out of 10 businesses in Kenya are in the bracket of SMEs. So this is indeed a critical industry that needs to be given its due attention. And guess who is joining us as one of the SMEs in this country? We're talking to Dennis Liala. He's a business the CEO of Western Elites Association, which is an organization that brings together SMEs from the western parts of this country. Thank you very much indeed, Dennis Liala, for your time.
Thank you, Brian.
First of all, help us understand, what would you say are some of the challenges facing SMEs in the country right now?
Okay, thank you. I've really given some exciting numbers there about the SMEs, and of course, when you look at the SMEs, for those who would understand, of course, these are small businesses with actually a turnover of less than 1 million Kenya shillings, of course, and of course, with employee size of 10 to 100 employees. So that is the employee size. And then, of course, you talked about the issue of the challenges that these SMEs are facing. Of course, we can say that the SMEs can't breathe at the moment because you look at from around 2020, we had the COVID aspect, which was really choking the SME space. And then now from there, we moved to actually elections again. Mm-hmm. You know that the elections normally derail or actually hamper, of course, the SME space in a way. And then, of course, from there now, we have seen the issue of floods. And just recently, I was here and we were talking about the impact of these floods on these SMEs. And then now, we are now on the aspect of the demonstrations, mm-hmm. which are, of course, ongoing. And of course, with the Gen Zs, of course, having their own, the demands and all that. So that then means that you look at let's start with the current demonstrations. Number one, you realize that the SMEs space is facing the issue of lack of market access. So you realize that, for example, you have a farmer there, of course, harvesting tomatoes, and of course, number one, there is the challenge of the logistics, because there is no movement of lorries to take these tomatoes to the market because of the current situation, the mm-hmm. demonstrations. Number two, so that means, of course, this farmer or the trader will not be able to access the market on Tuesday and Thursday, right? So that means then you are lacking the market. Number two, you're looking at now the issue of the destruction of property. You have seen the aspect whereby, of course, every time there is the demonstrations, you are seeing the people's kiosks, you know, the mama mboga that say their property is being destroyed, the inventory is stolen and burned, and even actually we saw a report recently from, of course, from the business community, the Nairobi, which was saying that this county alone, Nairobi city, is losing 5 billion Kenya shillings every day. Mm-hmm. So because of the demonstrations, of course, that day when there is demonstrations. So you realize that those are some of the challenges. And now we also look at the issue of the banking, the financial services aspect. Of course, the SMEs have, of course, survives mostly with credit. Mm-hmm. And then now let's look at the current lending rate, which is standing at around 18%. Mm-hmm. So you realize, you know, in business we have what we call the internal rate of return, which means that if I'm borrowing a loan at, for example, 18%, that means my rate of return should be around 20%, right? So that then I can make a margin there and, of course, pay back the interest plus, of course, the principal. So those are some of the challenges that this SME space is facing. And, of course, we are hoping that the situation is going, of course, to improve as time progresses. Yeah, thank you.
And so what is the role of the private sector? Because we've really talked much about what the government needs to do, but what is the role of the private sector in safeguarding the future of SMEs in this country? Because, look, SMEs are the future big corporations of Kenya. And without big corporation, then you're not talking about any private sector at all.
Yeah. That's a good question, Brian. The private sector, of course, has been doing, of course, a lot in terms of stepping up. Number one, we have seen them, of course, trying to look at the innovative ways. That means the technology aspect, right? So on the technology space, you see them trying to use the e-commerce, right? Whereby now someone, of course, can be able to buy commodities online, and of course they can able to deliver. So that's one of the private sector space. And of course, this private sector itself, we have seen the banking space also. The banking space has tried to do a lot in terms of ensuring that there is credit access to the SMEs, right? We have seen the issue of the digital financing, whereby now someone, of course, can access credit, of course, at the comfort of his seat, and of course can be able to do business. Of course, we have had that challenge of now, whereby you see the interest rate still is very high. But I've seen the central bank, or rather the CBK, really trying hard to ensure that it solves that issue of the interest rates. And of course, we have those that are, of course, predators. And that issue has been solved with time. And we're hoping that, of course, they are going to streamline and make changes so that, of course, the role of this digital financing is to ensure that actually there is inclusive financing, right? There is penetration of this credit to the interior, the local people can be able to access. So that is it. We have also the aspect of these SMEs doing their best to actually formalize themselves. And the government, of course, has made the issue of registering a business very easy through the e-citizen. So you have seen that the SMEs, of course, we have those that are trying to ensure that now they become formal. You know, when you become formal, you can now take credit that we're talking about now from a bank. You can be able now to exist and, of course, operate as a body separate entity, right? Very independent. Yeah, so those are some of the efforts being done by the SME space to actually be able to actually navigate the current situation. Yeah, thank you.
And you've talked about one of the biggest factors, facing the SMEs industry, and one of them is access to credit.
Yeah.
And you are quoting an interest rate of 18%,
yeah,
which is usually the number given by commercial lenders. Yes. Unfortunately, that is not the case because, when you factor in other costs of that credit, it goes up to almost. And most SMEs, as we know, their revenue stream is just one. And so getting a loan and paying it at an interest rate of 25% per annum, it becomes a Herculean task. No wonder most SMEs, they do not celebrate their 5th birthday. Mm-hmm. What do we need to do really to ensure that we move from the conversation and now get down to the real issues, whereby we can have a situation where SMEs are getting credit at an interest rate of 7%, at 8%. What do we really need to do with this?
Brian, the issue of the interest rates is actually dependent on the most of the time. It's about the CBK, right? We normally have the CBR rate, right? So when the central bank rate, the CBR rate, lowers. For example, during around 2017 to around 2022, we had a CBR of around 9%. It was normally maintained at that rate, right? So then when now, of course, from 2022, we have had this CBR climbing. It went up to around 13%. So now you realize that of course, this CBR, the CBK is looking at so many aspects. It's looking at the level of inflation, right? Is again looking at the issue of when of course the monetary aspect that it has to do to ensure that then we have the monetary space stable. So of course there is number one that I've said, the CBR, which of course determines. So when now the CBR sets, for example, the rate at 12%, then now the bank themselves have now to add a margin to that 12%, then now they're able to now lend. So maybe the aspect number one would be the government itself trying to see that how can we then be able to improve rather lower the CBR. And then of course we have now those we have other players that can come in with cheap credit, right? We have the World Bank and all other agencies, of course, that now come in and say that we want to offer credit at a lower rate, and then now we see the SMEs can be able to access that. So that is the game of actually the interest rates. Yeah.
But Liala, I mean, you've been in this business for a while now, and you know that almost every commercial bank in this country, you know, yes, they have an SME-focused lending line. But when you look at the loans advanced to SMEs, they are of all loans advanced by commercial lenders. What is really not happening? Is it a question of PR by commercial lenders? Is it a fact that maybe most SMEs do not qualify for credit, or they do not know how to borrow? What is not happening? Okay,
so thank you, Brian, for that. The issue of the bank not, of course, extending credit at the optimal or the required levels. Number one, I mentioned the issue of formalization of the SMEs, right? You know that no bank can access credit to you if you have not formalized yourself. Of course, it's normally a challenge, right? You need at least to have the KRA PIN. You need as a business, right? Or if it is, of course, a business name, you need that. And then now you need at least to have a certificate so that then the bank now can have a relationship with you. But then you realize that, you know, we have around 7.4 million SMEs, right? Around that. That's according to the Kenya Bankers Association data. And then the KBS says that we only have 1.5 million SMEs that are now registered, formalized with the, of course, with the government. So then the banks are having a challenge accessing, actually being able to have a relationship with these SMEs. So number one is then to ensure that SMEs themselves are able to formalize themselves. They have the KRA PIN, and they have is either they are registered as a business name or all that. And of course, number two, we have the issue of banks also. They are normally, you know, when a bank gives you a loan, they're actually normally looking at your ability to repay, right? So we see that, of course, we have the ability to repay. That's number one. Then number two, you will be looking at the issue of the collateral, right? So what do you have? Do you have a logbook, or you have a title deed? So when it comes to the issue of number one, the ability to repay, the banks want to look at what are the cash flows of these SMEs, right? If they are not stable, then of course they might not extend that. And then we have number two, you realize that most of the SMEs don't have collateral, right? Most of them. So then we have...
Collateral is a requirement.
Yes.
before you access any loan.
Yeah, it is.
So are we then setting them up for failure?
Okay, that is now when the issue of the digital financing comes in, right? I talked about the issue of digital financing, but then we said it is actually in a predator mode, right? You're looking at these digital lenders lending at around 147% interest, if you calculate. So them, they are not asking you for collateral. They are not looking at your cash flows, right? But that rate is very high. So then the thing here would be that the government, of course, is the one then to come in and say, how can we be able to cushion that? You know, they are one, of course, to offer most of the time what we call to intervene and say that we can be able, let these businesses, for example, these SMEs be formalized, and let's have an issue of, like, for example, they are being offered, these loans are being offered, for example, to groups. You know, it is easier when we have had this issue of the of course the business clubs. Of course, it's not really chama but table banking, right? Which has been working for some SMEs. So you realize that table banking, a bank, at least we are in a group of 10, right? So the bank knows that if it lends to us, to one of us, and of course we have one, the other person, of course, is able then to be able to act as a guarantor to the other person, then it's easier for this bank to trace. So I think one of the way, of course, I said, is the issue of the table banking, because we say most of them don't have collateral, and that is a fact. So the issue of the table banking, we have the issue of this digital lenders. If they are offering minus looking at the cash flows, of course, collateral, then how can we be able then to engage them so that then they can lower their of course, their interest rates, to, of course, a realistic levels. Yeah.
Well, if you're just joining us, we are having a very good conversation here with Dennis Liala. He's a business consultant as well as the chairperson of the Western Elite Association, which is a conglomerate of businesses from the western part of this country. We are looking at the future of SMEs and the challenges they are going through. He has talked about the ongoing national protest and how they are undermining the growth of SMEs in the country. Access to credit has always been a thorn in the flesh of SMEs in this country. You need collateral. Plus, the interest rate is always very high for most SMEs to access and repay. And then the other thing is, what is the government's interventionary role in all this? The government has been talking about the credit guarantee scheme. It was supposed to come into force in the year 2021. It never did. And now we're still talking about setting up these critical infrastructure that is going to shield or ring fence SMEs in times of crisis when they borrow and they can't pay. And then the other thing, the government has also rolled out the Hustler Fund, where SMEs can borrow up to, I don't know how much, from as low as 500 shillings to as much as, you know, your credit score allows you to. And the question is this: how many SMEs are getting this? The other thing is, the government has also been talking about setting up the SMEs Fund, where SMEs can borrow at a very, very low rate. We haven't seen these coming into the market. So what really do we need to do? Liala, when you look at those three interventions, the credit guarantee scheme, the Hustler Fund, and the much delayed SMEs Fund, what conclusions do you make when it comes to government seriousness in addressing access to credit for SMEs?
Okay, I would say that the government, of course, was fairly serious at the start. I realized that one of the government manifesto was the Hustler Fund that you have mentioned. And of course, they did work very well with the banks and rolled out the Hustler Fund. And of course, that I said is a tick. And we said that the challenge is actually the size of the loan being offered. So we say that averagely we are seeing
Have you ever borrowed the Hustler Fund?
the Hustler Fund,
Yes.
maybe friends borrowing, and of course they tell me that mostly the rate is around 500 Kenya shillings. So, and you realize that with 500 Kenya shillings, you can't do anything with that. And of course, it takes very...
But of course, this is incremental, yeah?
Yeah, but it's a very low pace before you reach to a level like even 5,000, which, of course, a Mamamboga there at Muduru, of course, will need at least to buy stock, sell, and of course all that. So we have the fund itself, which I said is a good idea, but it's a matter of how can we be able to, of course, the government increasing the size of this loan.
Upscale the credit.
Important. Yeah, they have to upscale that because it's a good idea. You look at the interest rate, it's fairly good compared to other lenders, as you have said. We've been looking at that rate, which is actually very punitive to these SMEs. So that is, of course, we can say the government has tried. The issue of the credit guarantee
So we
scheme,
agree. Number one, we agree that the Hustler Fund is a great concept.
exactly.
But it needs to be upscaled.
Exactly.
Because I do agree with you. What kind of business can you grow with 500 shillings?
Absolutely none.
Okay?
Yeah.
We need to rethink and remodel the Hustler Fund so that, you know, SMEs can access money to stock their business, to offset their credit, and of course to expand their business. What about the credit guarantee scheme?
Okay, of course, that one, of course, will say it has not materialized. But of course, maybe if the government, of course, we understand the government has been having some challenges. They have not stabilized. You understand the issue that is the matters at hand. But we just hope that once the issues, of course, the government again settles, dust settles, then the government will be able, of course, to work on that so that this comes, of course, materializes. Of course, that's what I would say. But it's still, again, a good idea whereby, of course, we just said that the main challenge here is about the issue of collateral, the security, which most SMEs, of course, don't have access to. They don't have, most of the people running the SMEs don't have land, right? You talk about the logbook, they don't have. So if the government can come in with that intervention, then it can be a great idea to actually solve, of course, fairly solve the challenges that we are facing. The other one you said about is the
SMEs fund.
Yeah, the SMEs fund, and of course that one we have not seen how it's going to work. Again, we have, of course, to look at look at how is it going to be rolled out. Yeah, and of course analyze it, and then we can speak more about it. But I say that the government is, of course, has tried, and we hope that the Hustler Fund side is going actually to upscale on that, and things, of course, we can see some fruits from that. Yeah.
The other thing that the government has been encouraging SMEs to do is to tap the market beyond Kenya.
Yes.
The African Free Trade Area Agreement came into force last year, where countries are now opening up their markets to other African markets without much restrictions. And the government has been very keen, telling local SMEs, please, don't just focus on the Kenyan market. Focus on the 1.2 billion people that Africa has to offer. Focus on the 54 countries that make up Africa. Are the SMEs listening to this, or are they ready to access this market?
Okay, that's a good question. When you look at the issue of the export market, and of course it's a good space, and the African free trade, of course, the area, the initiative, which of course came into effect last year, is still a good idea to ensure that then we have markets from the African, other African countries, of course, there is easy access to this, of course, to these other countries. So the thing is that the export market is, of course, a bit intricate, and of course it requires, of course, what we've said about the government still intervention. The government, of course, has been trying. We have seen this issue of the free, what we call industrial parks.
The free economic zones.
Yeah, free economic zones. Thank you. So the free economic zones have been important in terms that when you are operating there, you have either actually not accessing, getting taxes. These levies are not as at the level other businesses are getting. You have, of course, other concessions that you are getting. So those ones, and of course, we have seen mostly dealing with the issue of the clothing space, whereby most of them have been venturing into that. But the issue of the export market, I'll say that if you look at that space, it's about the challenges that are there. Number one, we see that other markets are normally very restrictive, right? Protectionism. They are trying to normally to protect their commodities, and this has been a phenomenon globally, whereby you have seen even the US trying to really impose a lot of tariffs to other, of course, to commodities, like to other commodities from outside. So you realize that the export market, number one, we have these countries trying to protect their commodities from, of course, access. Even if they say that the market is open, but we have the tariffs. Number two, we have then the issue of the regulatory framework, right? They have very high standards for you, of course, to access that market. You realize that you look at the standards, if it's actually like fresh produce. We have been seeing scenarios whereby someone takes avocados to the airport with a lorry, full lorry. So you reach there and you get back, you're told that the avocados are not good to the
they don't meet
level.
the necessary standards.
Yeah, the level, that required standards. So you have to, either now it's upon you to see what you can do about that. Either they take a half of it, or of course all of it. You are told actually return with your commodities. So that is the standards aspect. It's a very critical space that, of course, needs to be looked at. And of course, that means that then they
But if you allow me, I mean, to interject at that point, I mean, each country in the world, and I would want to talk about fresh produce, they have a set of their phytosanitary standards that must be observed, lest you import diseases into your country. You import pests into your country. And so you have so many SMEs joining this space without, first of all, understanding the phytosanitary requirements of the international export markets. And so then, because they need to get into business. So whose responsibility is it then to ensure that they meet the required standards in order for them to get to the international market? Just the other day, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Kenya and the EU signed the EU Economic Partnership, which gives access to the European market, to the Kenyan goods. And so you have the ready market here. But for you to access that ready market, you need to meet a set of requirements. Sometimes they are very tough. So what is the role of the government in ensuring that for SMEs who want to tap the international market, they are well capacitated in terms of knowledge and resources?
Yeah, you asked about whose role. Number one, it's about the SMEs themselves. You know, it starts with us, the SMEs. Nowadays, we have at least everyone, almost everyone has a smartphone, can access the internet. You can actually be able to download the requirements when it comes to AU market, you can be able to access and, of course, read what is required. Of course, you try to gain skills, knowledge yourselves. Then number two, you talked about now we have, of course, the private sector players. We have, of course, like if you look at these associations that we have in terms of the business related, right? They can be able, of course, to come in to train. Those, of course, are the private players, the NGOs and all that. And then, of course, now we have the government, which, of course, then comes in terms of training them, the skills, the capacity. We can have those seminars and all that. And then, of course, they're able to have the knowledge on what is required. So it's about also the SMEs. We see government normally tries. We normally have those trade shows and all that. But the turn-up also is also normally very low. So it's about, it's actually a collaborative approach aspect that we need to actually deploy, or rather employ, to ensure that we succeed. So, and this space is as I've said, it's a very tough one, especially you mentioned about the EU. The EU, actually, the European market actually is the toughest. You look at the issue of the sweet potatoes and all that, the regulations are very tough. So it's just about the government and all the other players sitting down and training them. And we left out another issue, which is the financing, the capital still. You still need some good capital for you to be able to access the market, because you need capital when it comes to freight. That's number one. Then you also need those licenses, the export licenses and all that. But then that one, it means we can have a scenario whereby we have more people, companies coming in just as exporters, right? To be able to facilitate that, so that we can have an aggregation, right? This SMEs, the businesses are able to produce what they can. If it is avocados and all that, they're able to produce. If it is even the clothing and all that, the shoes and all that, then they can be able actually to actually produce what they can. Then there is this aggregation. Then after that, of course, we have those off-takers that then come in and buy. And of course, if we have companies who have the capital, they can be able to access the required knowledge for that. Then they come in, they train the farmers, for example, they train the manufacturers who are, of course, in a small size, and then, of course, they off-take and actually sell, yeah.
Very good. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Dennis Liala. He's a business analyst as well as the chair of Western Elite Business. We are looking at the future of SMEs in this country, the challenges they are facing, and how they need to surmount these challenges, and how do we deal with some of those insurmountable challenges. Well, that's the conversation that we're having here. Are you an SME? Our lines are open. @O'Brien Kimani is my X handle. You have an X handle? What do we call the Twitter handle?
Yeah. Of course, it's Atware Association. And then, of course, mine is just the Lialo Militia. Yeah, Dennis, yeah.
Very good. You can get through to us so that we can have a very good conversation. And also, if you have a question that you feel needs to be addressed, you can just talk to us. And talking about SMEs, it's all about job creation. And the government is opening up a 2-day job fair in Kisumu. And right now, the Principal Secretary for Labor Skills, Shadrach Mwandime, is opening that fair at the National Industrial Training Authority in Kisumu. So let's go there and first of all have a listen, and then we'll be back with more stories.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you have benefited from the wisdom of the International Labour Organization representative. If we have a representative of the governor, Kisumu County, kindly let me know. I also wish to ask the representative of the Kotu to let us know when you arrive. Now I would like to invite the representative of the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Federation of Kenya Employers, that is FKE. Kindly. Please give him a clap as he comes to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Achok. I'm here representing Madam Jacqueline Mugo, the Executive Director of Employers. Madam Jacqueline is also wearing the hat of, she's the President of International Labour Organization. See, that is a global achievement. Can you clap for her in absentia? Yeah, I was given a speech here by Madam Jacqueline to read, but given that the chair had raised the red flag, that can create boredom, I'll just give highlights. Our chief guest on Shadrach Mwadime, Principal Secretary, Ministry of Labor, the representative of His Excellency the Governor, Kotu representative, NITA Chair and NITA Director General, ILO representative, Regional Commissioner Nyanza, Madam Florence, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Yeah, as FK, we are deeply honored to be in this important discourse, because the issue of unemployment is a labor issue. We are so concerned about it, and it's actually a social evil that is really very, very frustrating. We've seen some of our young people who have even graduated acquired very good paper certificates, but languishing in poverty. So this topic that the organizers settled on, that is unlocking employment opportunities, is very, very crucial to us as a federation, because we need to produce graduates with appropriate skills, the right skills in the labor market, those who can fit well in our labor landscape. As FK, you know, we stand for fair labor practice, and that is why we nominate that, you know, we use as our tool is what is called social dialogue.
That is the job fair being held in Kisumu at the National Industrial Training Authority Center in the city of Kisumu. Various stakeholders from the private as well as the public sector, you know, gathering there to discuss the future of jobs. And right here we are discussing the future of SMEs. We're in the company of Dennis Liara, a business consultant as well as an expert in matters business and SMEs. I want to ask you this question. How then do we create a future-ready SMEs, bearing in mind that the world is spinning at a very fast rate?
Sure, thank you. I think there have been discussed there about the employment. You realize how employment is a very important aspect in any country. And that is, of course, the said about them providing, of course, over 15 million jobs, of course, to these Kenyans. And of course, now, the question I've asked is a good one. It's about how can we make these SMEs ready, make them be ready for the future, to thrive, and of course to be sustainable, to see the aspect of sustainability of your businesses. And so number one is what we just came from, the aspect of training. The capacity building is still very critical for them, right? How can they be able to handle the basic things, financial management when it comes to business? I mean, how can they then be able to understand the legal framework in the country to operate? We talked about the issue of them to access credit. They need to be formalized. And so there is no way the government is going to actually assist them much if they are not formalized. We saw the government really trying a lot to able to register these businesses. I think that was the start of the term. So the training is very important. Them having the right skills, right? We have most of SMEs, yes, they have skills, but most of them are outdated. You know, what you gained from maybe your grandfather and all that, you're still using that. So how can we be able to train them? And then how can we be able actually to enable them now deploy technology? Actually, they have to, because nowadays, for the future, you talked about the future, and technology is the future. We have the issue of the AI and all that. But of course, they have actually to understand the basic things, like how can they use technology. Talked about the e-commerce, that is part of the technology. How can they automate their business? That's right. We have some simple things, like when it comes to accounting, you can use that for that. And then, of course, we have the issue of having that initiative to ensure that they access capital. You know, other countries really put a lot of emphasis on actually how can our businesses survive. And you have seen even in America, most of the time, the government comes in to even fund farmers, right? To fund businesses so that they can be able then to thrive, because capital is a very important aspect. So we have to ensure that how can we be able to put our hands together as the private sector, as the government, to look at the issue of capital. And of course, it's about also the SMEs themselves being able to be taught how good to use the capital, or if it's credit and all that. We have seen scenarios whereby an SME borrows money, and instead of using the money for the intended purpose, they go into other issues, consumption-based applications. So how can they be that this is the best way? You should use the credit given well, so that you produce, you multiply what you have, you repay the debt, right, and grow your business. So the debt itself, and even some have a negative attitude towards that. So capital is another ingredient, as I've said, when it comes to preparing them for the future. The technology, very crucial for the future actually. And then even trying to look at the environmental, actually the operating framework. How can we make this framework, the operating framework in this country, to favor the SMEs? Of course, we have so many interventions that the government has been coming up with, but of course it's about how can they deepen that, right, upscale. How can they be able, of course, to be actually ensure that whatever they're trying to do is actually having access to the intended persons or businesses, right? If we're talking about, like there is a program, like what we're talking about, the guarantee, the SME, the guarantee program, credit guarantee program, how can we be able to ensure that it accesses this, actually it gets to these SMEs? So, so we have to really, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of preparing these SMEs. And I think we need to really look at how other countries grew, right? We have, for example, China, which is a good example. From 1980s, they have really grown. You saw, we were saying that China was able to alleviate around 2 billion people, 1 billion from poverty. Yeah, in less than, it should be in less than 50 years or what. So they have really done a lot.
Actually, in less than 30 years,
30 years.
They've managed to uplift more than 700 million people from abject poverty.
Yes.
And this is what is referred to as the Chinese economic miracle. Liala, we have to come to the end of this conversation.
Yes. Great.
Always a pleasure to have you, and of course, sharing your insight with us. It's always a great concept. We look forward to talking to you, but before I let you go, what is your advice to the SMEs watching this program and to the young people watching this show and asking themselves, where do I start?
Thank you very much. For those watching, of course, the SMEs and the young people, of course, the young people, of course, I will tell them that number one is that we see most of them graduating, and we say that the only way, the best way ever is that for you to understand is that you are being trained to create jobs, opportunity. That means entering into a business, right? So that they should not be focused on employment, right? Being employed in the formal space. So that's the first thing. And when you say about getting into business, of course, you start as an SMEs. So I will say that the young people should have a good attitude, the right attitude towards starting small businesses, right? I mean, we have those, of course, you asked about the entire SMEs. It's about them just then being, of course, I know we are in a very tough situation currently, the demonstrations and all that. It's just, of course, them trying to look at how will they, of course, recover from that. Like, for example, those that have had their property, of course, businesses destroyed. We are hoping that the government will come up with measures actually to assist them, of course, get back to their feet. Word for them is that let them, of course, just keep on being resilient and trying their best. Whatever opportunity that comes, whether it is credit-based, whether it's training, they should always be ready to take that up. They should be able to attend the trade fairs and all that. Yeah.
Very good. Sure. In short, it's a question of learn, and learn.
Exactly.
And of course, learn to listen.
Exactly.
Very good. Thank you very much, Liala, for your time.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
I mean, listen. I want you to listen. It's always said that business is hard and hard enough. But it's just a question of learning and understanding the art of business, the art of seizing opportunities so that you can match and get big in business. I have always told you this. When you go into the world of business, you're going to go through what we call the VUCA, V-U-C-A environment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. Because the nature of business is that you are not in a position to predict what is going to happen tomorrow, but you're expected to be ready for tomorrow. So go in, make it big, and let us all build Kenya. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you very much indeed for your time. You have been watching this check live from our national headquarters here at Broadcasting House. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your afternoon, because who is coming up next? Eat Kurunzi Mashinani. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.